So let's hear it for Erin McGann and the home team. Yay. It's always so nice when we get to hear all of you sing. It's wonderful. So this week, our country turns 241 years old, and there will be picnics and fireworks celebrating the American spirit. And what is the American spirit? That's one of the things that I want to look at today. What exactly is that? Our country was born from a desire to be free. And this sense of freedom that we exhibited 240 some years ago was not limited just to our country. It was also in France. It was happening throughout Europe. So there was this great desire to be free, to be an individual, to have individual rights. No longer was it okay to be governed by a king or a queen. And so the rights of the individual became important to the founders of the United States. And I just want to share with you a part of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. From the consent. So it's not top down, it's the consent of the people. So again, no longer satisfied to be governed by a king or a queen. Sometimes one way that we get to see where we are and who we are is by stepping outside of it, right? Have you not found that when you travel to another country in particular, that you're able to look back at this country and to see it in a different way? And I had that privilege at a very young age when I was 20. And one of the things that I noticed when I was 20 years old, because I didn't come from a wealthy family, and yet I was able to travel far. And what I recognized was that some of the villages that I visited, particularly in Africa, that none of them would hardly ever leave their village or go, 100 miles from that because they didn't have the resources. Whereas I had the ability to come back to the U.S. and I lived small, I didn't have a car, I roomed with people, and I worked 2 or 3 jobs, and I would work and then save my money and I'd hit the road again. And then I'd come back and I'd do it again. And it was this great privilege that I realized that I could kind of just hop around the world as much as I wanted to do. I think it's also good or auspicious, I guess, that my friend Arlene is here because we met, like I said, in Africa in 1974, and we were tent mates when we traveled across the Sahara Desert. We would have to put a tent up every night, and we were with a truck with a bunch of other people, and we literally had 13 flat tires on the Sahara Desert. And there are no gas stations, or at least there weren't back then, and the driver of the truck would send us out hiking in the Sahara looking for pieces of rubber that we could use to fix the tires that we had. So it was supposed to take us, I think, 5 days to drive across. I think it ended up taking us 2 or 3 weeks, but while walking the Camino in Spain, I was envious of the ancient walls and the ancient roads that I saw in some of the towns. I was envious, when I'd watch a kid throw his ball against the wall, I'd think, wow, his ancestors probably threw a ball against that wall. And yet, I also realized that even though we don't have ancient physical walls here in this country, we also don't have ancient mental walls that keep us in our place. In many ways, because we are Americans, we are free to reinvent ourselves. We don't like what something is, you can move, you can start over. Now, the challenge is that we always take ourselves with us, of course. So, not surprisingly, we usually recreate the same situation over and over again. So we're free from some of the constrictions of our ancestors, right? Now, one of the founders of the Baha'i faith believed that the United States would be a leader in bringing peace to the world. And one of the founders said this in 1912. It is my hope that these revered people present may attain both material and spiritual progress, as they have advanced wonderfully in material degrees, so may they likewise advance in spiritual development, until the body shall become refined and beautiful through the wealth of spiritual potentiality. So how have we done? I think in regards to material progress, we have done quite well, don't you think? And here are just a few of the things that we have invented. We invented the Ferris wheel and the zipper. Where would you be without a zipper? Americans, we invented the electric light, the skyscraper, machine guns, airplanes, the nuclear bomb, hearing aids, microwaves, mobile phones, personal computers, the internet, jazz, the movie industry, and of course the list goes on and on and on. Lately it's Lyft and Uber and Amazon, and it just keeps growing and it keeps expanding. We were the first to land on the moon. And then we can look at, so we're doing pretty well on the material side. We're pretty inventive, will give us that. But how are we doing on the spiritual side, on the spiritual potentiality? Well, one thing is that the New Thought movement was born here, and I don't think the New Thought movement could have been born anywhere else, because it was kind of a compilation of the East meets the West. And a stepping away from the old religion. I see that there is an embracing of practices from other traditions, such as meditation, prayer, yoga, the Buddhist practice of kindness and compassion. And so we have the freedom to pursue what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. So I need to quote Jesus here a little bit. He said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in a field, and though it was the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants, and it becomes a tree so that the birds can rest on its branches." So you get the idea, right? This tiny little seed, and it grows into something really big. And he also says, well, what shall I compare the kingdom of God to? Well, it's like yeast that a woman took and mixed in about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. And of course, it expanded. So when we look at this expansion of consciousness, and we look at 240 years ago where there was this burst of freedom, again, not just with us, but I think it awakened all in humanity. Like, no longer do we want to be constricted, but we want to express ourselves, and we want to be that individual Christ self, that individual God self, that individual personality that we are, and let that come through. And we've seen it expanding in so many different ways. Perhaps this expansion of consciousness that has exploded, particularly here, is a direct result of our diversity, because we are a nation of immigrants, and we each came here with different traditions, with different religions, with different beliefs and different practices. I mean, how many of you grew up with your parents or your grandparents' superstitions all around you, right? I mean, I grew up like never put a shoebox on the table, ever. I still can't put a shoebox on the table. I freak out if I see a shoebox on the table. I don't even know why, but you're not supposed to put a shoebox. It was carried over from the Scandinavian culture from the old country. I don't know. I mean, what about who grew up with you can never open an umbrella in the house, right? All right. So, and I'm sure if we went around the room, all of us have these crazy superstitions that we were raised with that were handed down to us. And being in this country, we're free to throw those off and go, I don't know that I will put a shoebox on the table. But we have melded together to create something better. And what's ironic is that we are now seeking, or some are seeking, ways to block immigrants from entering that which has made us so rich and so powerful and so interesting, and the creation of so many things and music that has come from here. And there is an increase, as I said, in the practice of prayer, meditation, and compassion. And we also have an increase in gun violence, don't we? So it's very interesting these times we're living in. We're sort of like this seesaw, right? We have the internet to bring us together and to create a global community, right? That's the whole idea. It's like we're one mind, we're connected. But it's also serving to separate us because we can read and communicate only with those who agree with us, right? We can block everybody else and we can just have our own views. The American dream is becoming difficult for the younger generation because of high college tuition and low pay, and yet I see that many are creating a new American dream, and that American dream is not dependent on material gain. I've seen some of the younger generation move into co-housing, into communities, and kind of going back probably to the way our ancestors lived, or at least the early immigrants when they arrived. It was the grandma and the kids and the grandkids all living together. And maybe you don't want that situation, but co-housing and living in a different way in community is not a bad thing. You know, maybe the house with the white picket fence all by itself and living a life that's all alone isn't the best thing. So I'm appreciative of their willingness to look at things differently. It is no secret that we are living in a nation that is increasingly divided, and we need to learn to speak with respect to those of differing views, because what seems to be happening is that our words are becoming filled with contempt. And once we move into contempt, it's hard to get back. A study was done that in couples counseling, that when couples start rolling their eyes at each other, they're probably headed for divorce because it's moved into contempt. Anger is fine, you can express your anger, but when you start going, oh brother, and rolling your eyes, and do we not roll our eyes at people who have different views than us? Like, really? How can you think that? And moving into that idea of contempt. So I was reading an article about how to speak. So what is it, the language? They were looking at what is the language between like those on the left and those on the right. And the language on the left is taking care of. That's a sentence or a word that they use a lot. They want to take care of the environment. They want to take care of, and then on the right, the language is about purity and loyalty. And so the suggestion is when you have a conversation, try to use the words that are important to the other side. Look to talk about loyalty and about purity and how that can come through. And then on the other side, safety. And it's just a tiny little shift, so to just to begin to look at things a little bit differently. What I believe is that we're laying the groundwork and that we're planting the seeds for the next 240 years. I believe that we've just finished a cycle, and we're ready to begin another cycle with our country. And we have come so far in this expansion of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. We've done it materially, and we will continue to do it materially, most likely. And now we're being called to step it up, just as the founders of the Baha'i faith saw in this place. It's time to pick up the mantle that is foreseen by them and carry it, to be the spiritual leaders who bring peace, because we have all the tools we need, do we not? I mean, really, we know we intellectually grasp the compassion, the kindness, the meditation, the prayer. We got it. Now we just need to act on it. By the way, a few weeks back or a month ago when we talked about this guy, Troy, was here. And remember, he was going to put an app together, and you were supposed to meditate and mark it, and he had a little trouble getting the app up and running, but it is up and running now. And next week, he's going to come to the picnic, and we're going to do like a flash mob meditation. He's putting it out through Seattle. So at 1 o'clock at Denny Park, we're going to have like a 20-minute flash mob meditation. At that point, we should all have our apps so we can all sign on. And, again, it's an experiment. It's taking these spiritual tools, bringing them into the current world, and going, okay, so how does this work? How do we be spiritual leaders who bring peace? We are at a crossroads, and I believe that we are up to the task. So here's my question to you. How do you, if you want to use your imagination, how do you view the next 240 years? And you don't have to answer that right now, because I'm going to have you close your eyes for a minute and just review the last 240, and then imagine moving ahead 240. And we'll do it quickly. It won't take a long time. So I invite you just to close your eyes for a minute. And imagine that it's 1776, and there's this great urge for freedom, for individuality, to not be ruled by anyone. And we see that revolution that was happening, that great revolution. And then if you move forward in your mind's eye and just begin to see the pioneers moving throughout the country, and I know we can't do that without also honoring our Native American peoples who were here, but we honor that as well. The tragedy, the triumph, all of it. And perhaps in our mind's eye, we want to fast forward to the Civil War. We had slavery and the tragedies and the atrocities that went with that, the pain, the suffering, the agony. And yet there was also a standing up to that and a fighting of that, so that we began to move really toward what the seed was planted initially, which was the equality of all men and women. And granted, it took another 100 years, really, and still, as it unfolds. But just allow your mind to move forward into then the 1900s and the Wright brothers, the Great Depression, Roosevelt and the New Deal, Eisenhower and Kennedy in the 60s. The assassinations. And we move into the 90s with the .com and the internet. We see the banks crashing, the Gulf War, the Middle East, the rise in terrorism, the rise in violence, but also the rise in compassion and kindness. And imagine that you can set the next 240 years. So in your mind's eye, I'm going to invite you to travel forward in time. And I want you to imagine the best of the best, that what the founders of the Baha'i religion saw in this country was that there is this great expansion of the kingdom of heaven. Not just materially, but spiritually. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you envision. Imagine that this country is the leader of peace, the leader of equality, the leader of diversity, the leader of ingenuity. So I invite you to come back whenever you're ready. We know that our thoughts and prayers have power. So I invite you just to play with this idea, like, where are we going? Where are we going, and what is it that you see? What is it that you want to happen? Because again, we're really at a crossroads here. and we can rise to this occasion. I know that we can. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So may we step up to the task that is before us as we celebrate this 241st year. Happy 4th.